Good morning, everybody. Welcome into your FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight on this Thursday morning. I'm Kaylee Nix here with Thomas Wasson, and it's time to break down this week's episode of Loaded and Rolling. Thomas, how are we doing on this Thursday?
Oh man, we're doing great. I would be in studio, but a tree fell on my house last week. So we've been dealing with some drama of the weather related variety.
Yeah, lots of that going on right now with still Tropical Storm Debbie creating some havoc down across the southeast. Luckily, we escaped its wrath, but something that we'll be keeping an eye on. This week's episode of Loaded and Rolling was yet another good one, and we are hitting on something that is just the continual thorn in the side, especially for enterprise fleets, and that is fleet safety, compliance with your safety standards. Talk to us a little bit about your episode, Thomas.
This is a fun topic. I mean, it's a topic that I somewhat paid attention to when I got yelled at by safety people when I worked in operations, and then my wife works in safety, so then I started hearing more about it with all the cool technology. And then lately it turns out that the whole thing of safety is like going through a revolution. So I spoke with the folks from Nauto. It is Stephen Heck, who's the CEO of Nauto, and they're talking a lot about how technology these days is, especially their platform in specific, is doing a great job at working on overcoming not only distractive driving, but fatigued driving and figuring out ways to minimize distraction, thus increasing safety.
So obviously, we know that distracted driving is something that plagues just the general vehicle operator population. And forget about it when it comes to your teen drivers and your young drivers, right? That phone is glued in their hand. But distracted driving is also a really big problem when it comes to our commercial drivers. And it's one that holds a lot of liability to it. We know that oftentimes, if an accident has occurred between a major motor vehicle and a pedestrian, not pedestrian, and a regular smaller vehicle, that the first question that they ask is, well, was the driver of the truck distracted in some way? Were they on their cell phone? Nowadays, we have a lot of interior facing cameras, which is one of those technologies that help prevent that distraction or give us some good eyes on what was going on. But what other technologies are out there that aim to either kind of curb distraction or keep an eye on it?
Well, the buzzword, but it actually works in this instance, is AI vision learning. So imagine that. Is it a stop sign or is it not a stop sign? Well, those were the halcyon days. We just had to figure out stop signs. The technology now with the cameras and the machine learning, after looking through millions of instances of distracted or not distracted, they can actually figure it out. What was fascinating was when I talked with Stefan about it, he told me that it was between like 7 and 11, if I recall, instances of distraction per hour with fleets when they first implemented inward facing cameras because they wanted to figure out what's our baseline. So imagine that. And then imagine as you're on the roadway, it seems like only trucking so far has decided to take on the task of how distracted is everyone else? Because if you, this is at least my experience, if you're driving down the road, you see a lot of people, a lot more than that 7 to 11 range when they're looking down as they're driving on their cell phones. So for trucking companies, this is a big deal because obviously 80,000 pounds is a heck of a lot moving down the road fully laden compared to a family car sedan between 2 to 4,000.
And when it comes to types of distractions, we're not just talking about cell phone usage, although that's the one that most often comes to mind, right? Distractions come in a lot of forms. Like me personally, I look at the weather a lot. Like I've got like my eyes out the windows, and then before you know it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm also driving. Like I need to be paying attention to the road, not what the sky looks like. That's just one of those things. You've got environmental distractions that are around you. Say, for instance, if you are in a driving team, if you're a team driver, your driver partner might be a distraction for you. It could be something like eating on the road. It could be something like noticing there's a distracting noise or a rattle or a maintenance issue with your truck. And they come in all shapes and sizes, and they all aren't necessarily weighted the same when it comes to tracking. Is that correct?
Yeah, not all distractions are equal in terms of distractions. There's even from one end of the curve, there's the you're zoning out, you're on the highway. Statistics show that you get drowsy. You're just kind of looking. You're no longer checking your mirrors. You're no longer looking through to make sure that everything's all right. That's one form. That's kind of like induced by the driving act in and of itself. You can also become drowsy or distracted and not fully aware, even if you do stuff as light labor. So that's something that a lot of folks like UPS and FedEx and parcel delivery and even the mail person may have to deal with. But on the very, very far side, technology nowadays is to a point where we want to remind drivers to pay attention. We want to let them know if there's a lane warning. I've talked to drivers in a Volvo, and an example of it was a certain safety system a driver had turned on, and it just kept beeping incessantly every time a car passed. So on the flip side, you could have distractions from the road itself, or you can even, and this is what the folks at Nauto said, you can even have situations where you're meant to stop distracting, but then sometimes you're overdoing it and causing even more distractions because now it sounds like alarm bells and claxons going off in the background.
So one of the species that Nauto focuses on is kind of those long tail catastrophic consequences to distraction, right? The very severe bodily injury to pedestrians or to other drivers, the potential of preventing death and major accidents like that. That's kind of their focus point. But when it comes to eliminating distraction and kind of working to prevent it, you prevent those long tail catastrophes by curtailing your distractions on the short end on those day to day practices, right? So, how do they work to make sure that they are doing that? That it's not just about the focus of, hey, you know what? You're fine that you hit a house when you were distracted as long as you didn't hit a person. You want to make sure, no, 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 you don't hit the house.
Correct. We Most fleets are worried about property damages, taking off mirrors, running into the docks, ripping off your trailer doors, fun things like that. The folks at NATO were like, no, we got to find. It's really the catastrophic ones, personal injury, having any issues like those accidents. The first step is collect the data. You'll find out that 80% of the time, like it's an 80-20 rule. So you have to identify that 20% that are probably statistically the most unsafe. Either it's through hard braking events, running stop signs, speeding when they shouldn't be speeding, historical patterns of speeding, improper lane change, taking your eyes off the road with those cameras. Now that you found that, the next goal is you coach, because in the past we didn't know. I mean, it was very reactive. You don't really know how good your drivers are, how good your fleet is. You just hire them on, and their DAC, their safety record looks clean, seems good enough. But now there's actually the ability to do it. And that was one of the cool things I spoke with Stefan about. He was like, look, it's not out there to punish drivers. Most of the time, as soon as we implement this, that 7 to 11 instances of distractions per hour plummets. Most of the fleet actually is like, oh crap. Because he said our goal is to show you the oh crap moment as a learning lesson. Like, oh, this is why I shouldn't have done that. Because that's how you learn in some instances. You got to learn quick. Other instances, it finally helps drivers who may have not been coached or taught correctly. And that can happen a lot. And I think that's something that this technology, from a privacy standpoint, you're giving up an instance of privacy in some regards. You're being watched for your behavior. But at the same time, like, it does open the door for coaching and help try to reduce that risk of catastrophic. So it's a fine balancing act because you also want to take privacy concerns into consideration.
A fine balancing act, as you mentioned, and I guess we're only going to continue to see more work being done in this space. Thomas, for the newsletter coming out this week, where can people go to find that, and what are you writing about?
A lot of fun stuff, LMI data, Class 8 orders, getting all the good meaty information just for you, dear listeners and readers. But you can check it out, freightwaves.com/loaded and rolling. It's going to come out Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you missed this episode and you want to watch it on demand, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, look up Loaded and Rolling. We get around.
All right, Thomas, thanks for that. We will catch up with you more next week.